Rock on. Well, thank you, everyone. It is good to have you back. It is Wednesday, hump day, which means Wednesday is the day after Tuesday. We're back here in the studio again. I am Jay from whiskeyraiders.com. We're your kind of top resource. We're your Rotten Tomatoes of whiskey, and I'm joined by John from the Bourbon Finder. John, how you doing?
Good, man. How you doing?
I'm good. It's rare that I get to see your shining face 2 nights in a row, let alone more than every now and then. So it's good to have you.
Lucky you, huh?
Lucky me indeed. We are here again. So if you guys joined us last night, you were part of we won't call it the in crowd, we'll call it the exclusive. You got a box in the mail. You were one of the lucky few people that got to taste along with myself and John and the Westland crew. Some of you were part of 5 sample gang, some of you were 4 sample gang. Go ahead, if you got that 5th sample, enjoy it when you want. Most importantly, though, some of you were part of 0 for 4 gang, which was me. You whiffed on everything we had, but we'll talk more on that in a little bit. I think, you recovered from last night, John. You ready to dive in tonight?
I'm ready to tear the lid off this thing, man.
I mean, after an intro like that, it would be hard not to just kind of go into this full steam ahead.
Yeah, shit. I almost flipped my desk over. I was so pumped.
I mean, you have been in the market for a new desk, so it would explain
That's
it.
true.
But, I mean, it's always good to get new shit.
Shit, yeah. All right, well, let's get our buddies from Westland in here and let them sort of explain a little bit more about the event, talk about the data, and I'm sure we'll get back to the revealing of what everything is so people can see what they were sipping on, all right?
Hell yeah. And we also are joined. Go ahead and bring him on in. We've got a new face joining us tonight. I am told he's higher up on the food chain, which always makes for an interesting choice. But Chris, Steve, I won't call you the peons of Westland, but we're also joined by Matt, who is a co-founder of
You've been called worse.
Yeah, I mean,
oh my God, that's a hell of an intro.
I mean, sorry, I don't know if peon was on like the official script.
No, that's good. That's good.
Can you say that on the air? I'm not sure.
You're like writing that down. But thank you guys so much for joining us again. Steve Hawley and Chris Riesbeck, you guys saw from them last night. If you're joining us for the first time, this is a global reveal in the Judgement of Westland. This was a huge mega blind tasting run through our bourbon, and it's great to have a new face here, Matt, too. So let's give us the 10,000 foot view on what you do real quick for everyone that's new joining in, and then I'd love to hear a little bit about the distillery from you, Matt.
Yeah, well, thanks guys for having us on here. It's just fun to be able to do a Judgement of Westland with you guys. Thanks everybody for tuning in. So my name is Matt Hoffman, co-founder, master distiller, and managing director at Westland. So we are a single malt whiskey distillery. That's our whole. That's it. That's everything that we are and everything that we do. We try to be reflective of place. I think especially for people who are tuning in tonight, we're gonna be big fans of bourbon. The thing that we tell people all the time is that America is this amazing country, amazing, huge country, and we're as far away from Kentucky as you can get. But, we live in one of the best places to grow barley in the world, actually. And that's, and this is going to sound like hyperbole. And if somebody wants to challenge me, that's fine. But this place is actually better. The Pacific Northwest is a better climate for growing barley than you have in Scotland, which is a really remarkable combination of the dreary, wet weather we have here, but also these amazing kind of Mediterranean style summers that barley really, really likes. So that was our whole thing. We said it's more authentic for us as Americans, but also Americans in the Pacific Northwest to be making single malts rather than trying to do what is done 2,000 miles away and done really well in Kentucky. So that's it. We wanted to make an American single malt that is reflective of us here in the Pacific Northwest. But our approach is really different. And this is why the Judgement, campaign here is so exciting, we the pitch was always we're gonna make a product that's never been made successfully before in the United States at the most expensive raw ingredient you could possibly use. We'll have no revenue for at least 3 years, and we will have no idea how it's going to taste.
Good
And
business
like,
model.
yeah, so this is like it's like an insane, proposition. And starting a whiskey distillery in many ways is looped in with that. But our approach was we believe that there's flavor in raw ingredients that wasn't being pushed, wasn't being examined by the Scotch whiskey industry, which is still true today. And it's actually not just the Scotch whiskey industry. A lot of the whiskey industry really doesn't look at raw ingredients as a form of flavor. So when we go out and we say this whiskey is, a 5-year-old single malt, but we believe that, it can stand toe to toe with the best around the world. We believe that we say that coming from a place of, well, we're approaching the whiskey differently. We're approaching whiskey with raw material flavor being first and foremost, and a bottom up whiskey. We don't have any complaints, as I think we all know, there's never been a better time to be a whiskey drinker worldwide than right now. The amount of stuff that's produced, in the US and Scotland and everywhere is just incredible. But our approach is a different one, which is to look at the raw ingredients as a source of flavor. And to be able to do that at a global level is always our ambition, which kind of leads us back to the whole point of this judgment campaign is to, you guys decide when you're tasting things, you guys decide whether, we know what we're talking about or not. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Now, I have one burning question, and I don't know whether it was Steve or Chris that was like, hey, I have this bright idea. We're just going to put it all out there. And it's there's a zero, there's a non-zero chance it could end poorly. Like we have a 25% chance it could go randomly. Like, were you guys like, yep, like cool, let's send it? Did you have any kind of shivers about that, or was it full steam ahead?
Westland is a very much a send it sort of company.
Okay. I like it.
My
pit vipers.
I mean, it's like, it's in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, the fact that we were doing, whiskey in a place that doesn't have a history of making whiskey, the fact that we're making single malts in America, the way that we're doing it. I mean, even today, 40% approximately on a yearly basis of the stuff that we produce, that we distill, is a combination of cask or a new barley variety or different peat, something that we nor anybody else has ever done before. And that compounds, right? So when you look at that sort of stuff, there's some things that you really favor and you keep doing some of those things, but 40% roughly over the past 3 or 4 years really shows you we have some would call it a poor risk tolerance level, but the flip side of that is you're never going to get anywhere unless you try to do different things and you try to push it. You could laboratory it to death and study these things, but when you have a belief, especially like in barley, like cask number 1 in barley, or that we made was made with 5 different types of malted barley that had flavor, that the whole, whiskey establishment was saying, oh no, barley doesn't have any flavor, which is of course, preposterous. So yeah, this is kind of who we are, but I think this is part of the fun of being an American single malt right now. And just being where we are at Westland is like, there's no history and tradition and legacy here that you're looking at. We're a byproduct of this kind of, restless, Western ideal. And we're obviously, to me, obviously a product of, where we live and the culture that comes from that. So in many ways, to send it is kind of the morally right thing to do. Or maybe that's me justifying our actions after the fact.
Think we talked a little bit about this last night, that what we do and what some of these other whiskeys that are in this judgment do, and what's exciting about world whiskey is that not everybody is trying to create a replica of Scotch whiskey in their region, right? So it was less for us about an anxiety over whether we felt we had a good enough product to compete against some of the finest whiskeys in the world. But, it did cross our minds that a lot of people aren't ready for that, particularly in the single malt circles where there's a lot of baggage that people carry from drinking Scotch whiskey for years and years and years. And this is what they were told it's supposed to taste like. So there was a little nervousness on our part. It wasn't like, will they like the whiskey or will they like our whiskey? And we could talk about whether our whiskey's in this competition or not. It wasn't about whether they'll like it. It was more about, will they get it? Right. And that was kind of the the one tiny nagging anxiety that we got over pretty quickly and said, let's just do this.
I could tell you that Steve is downplaying it a little bit as the person who was responsible for whether that liquid was basically well received or not. It was more than a little bit of anxiety, but I mean, really, after the first go, after we released our first whiskeys in late 2013, and we saw the reception, we saw that, to Steve's point, people did get it. We're saying, here's these flavors coming from roasted malts, the nutty notes, the chocolates, new American oak, in single malt, which is not commonly done, but paired with the roasted malts works really well. Would they get it? And they did. And that, I mean, to Steve's point, that is when this moment of like, okay, people are going to understand what we're trying to do here. And it's been a lot easier. Well, not a lot easier, but certainly it's been easier than it was in those first few years where you just didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's always the uncertainty that I think is fun. One of my favorite experiences, John and I had the opportunity to talk to not only Greg Metzi of Old Elk, but also the CEO at the same time. And, we asked them, like, what did you think of Greg Metzi always picking the most expensive possible mash bill ever? And the CEO was like, we thought about it and we're like, you know what, fuck it. Like, this is the way to get the best whiskey. And so it's always cool to see brands just kind of, going with the full send. But we'll go ahead and pivot here a little bit. First off, guys, if you are joining us now, this is the second night of the Judgment of Westland. We're calling it the grand reveal. If you want some free swag, to our YouTube overlords, none of it will include booze. I'm sorry, you guys got your booze other ways. But if you're interested in free swag, drop your Instagram handle in the chat with a thumbs up emoji, and afterwards we will pick a couple people. Chris will send you. I'm told it's a love package, like a care package. We'll figure out what's actually in it. But
you don't want.
Yeah, do you want a love package from Chris?
Listen,
full of unicorns and rainbows. So.
I hope people are into romantic fan fiction about Guy Fieri, because if that's the case, then we're going to be totally fine.
All right. Well, I mean, if you like Guy Fieri, if you like free stuff,
with
the
like correct
swag,
pronunciation there too. Very nice.
Well done, Jay. Very well.
I've seen the Hot Ones episode. I've seen the Hot Ones episode. But yeah, so drop your Instagram handle in the chat. Throw us an emoji. We'll have a good time. But let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and pivot a little bit. Steve, Chris, you guys have the data. I'm happy to admit that you guys are Redditors for joining us. Most of you got your results in. Typically, you guys aren't super great about getting things in on time. So I'm proud. Like, it's a proud parenting moment. Like, most of you did the assignment. Like, good for you. But if you haven't gone ahead and put in your tasting notes, you can still scan your QR code in your tasting sheet. Get them in. I will not shame you for being late in the ways that I typically would. Just, get your notes in. We'd love to see them. But I'm curious, Steve, should we talk about the data a little bit?
Yeah, we're going to give you the data all up here. So like you were talking about, Jay, if you guys want to take the Judgment of Westland tasting now, we can probably wait till the end of the show here to reveal the whiskeys that you're tasting that are assigned and associated to your specific tasting mat. What we're going to talk now is the data that we collected from yesterday. So yesterday we had 169 people complete the scoring for the judgment. That's out of an overall 1,609 tastings that have been done globally over the last 2 months, let's say. So a little over 1,600 globally. Of that, 169 was your group last night. Super cool. That's definitely the biggest tasting that we've ever done in one fell swoop. So kudos to you all. There's 4 different single malts from 4 different regions around the world. We've got the U.S. represented. If you think really, really, really hard, you can probably guess what distillery provided the U.S. sample. As we mentioned yesterday, we're revealing the regions. We're not revealing the actual whiskeys. I know that's disappointing to a lot of you, but there's a couple good reasons for that. One, it's not really the point of the exercise or the experience, is it? The point is, do whiskeys, single malts in particular, from around the world deserve to be considered next to each other? We think the answer is yes. The data proves that out, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The other reason is, while each distillery knows they're being included in this Judgment of Westland program, we have yet to come together as a group and agree or not whether everybody wants to be revealed. We won't reveal the whiskeys at the end of the campaign, which is going to be at the end of this month, unless all 4 say yes. If 3 out of 4 say yes, but 1 still says, I don't want to be revealed, then none will be revealed. It's out of respect for them. So that's just the way it's going to be. So, so the countries are the US, Scotland, India, and Australia. So what I'm going to tell you now is the global averages out of 5 stars that we're getting for each of those 4. The US actually comes in the lead globally with I've gone ahead and added a decimal point just for you guys. If you go to our website, you'll just get 1 decimal point. But here tonight,
the extra decimal.
Extra data for you nerds.
So the US
scientific accuracy.
That's right.
Scotland comes in at 3.29, India 3.05, and Australia 3.39.
Wow, interesting.
Interesting to note, all of these numbers supstantially higher than Steve's GPA in college.
Whoa.
Ooh.
Unsportsmanlike
Wow.
conduct there, buddy.
And we
Nice
let him
right.
manage the data?
Yeah, I will pass the login information over to you, Chris.
I don't actually know how to use a computer. Yeah.
So we'll talk about that, but I thought it would be interesting to see the difference first between the global average and just pulling out our bourbon group and what the scores look like for the 169 of you that have submitted. So I think John can put it on the screen, so I don't even have to look down and read it. But US 3.3, Scotland 3.33.
Oh, wow.
They edged us out there. India up a little bit, 3.1. Australia was the clear favorite of your group at 3.5.
That is crazy to me.
Yeah, it's a really interesting shift in these, and admittedly, we've seen this kind of the U.S. and Australia. Frankly, through a lot of these globally, have both scored really high, and I think there's elements to both of those whiskeys that make a lot of sense. There's I think someone pointed out yesterday, I don't want to, without trying to give away too much, someone pointed out like, oh, is there wine cask finishes and things like that? There's definitely some spritiness to that Australian one. There's a brightness to that whiskey. I'm seeing in the chat right now, people asking about the American one. So obviously that's our Westland flagship release that we've entered in there. So this is an opportunity for people to try this new whiskey that we're producing. There is a very, very small amount of peated spirit in there. So, as the Scots would say, a little sort of bit of a whisper of it kind of running through. But honestly, it's more about connecting all of the dots of those raw material choices that we make. And we spoke about it yesterday, but, and as Matt alluded to, it's the use of that roasted malt, that Belgian yeast, the new American oak, a little bit of that peat. It's to incorporate all those things. And we've gotten the question from a ton of people over the last, probably 7 or 8 months as we've been bringing this whiskey out around the world. And people are like, oh, why didn't you guys start with this? The reality was we didn't have the maturity of stocks to make that whiskey. I think it's a good reminder that like it takes time to make whiskey. You don't just sort of like go to the faucet and go, yeah, just like pour it into the bottle and let's sort of be on our way. Like every drop of Westland, every ounce of liquid that we put into a bottle has come off our stills. And as a result of our production team and our blender, like those things take time. So when you see a whiskey like our new flagship expression that's got some really cool mature notes showing up, that's something that we couldn't have made that whiskey a year ago. We couldn't have made that whiskey 2 years ago. And it's really exciting to see that we've hit a point now, we've just passed our 10-year anniversary, that we're able to produce a whiskey that has that sort of profile. And frankly, it's probably this thing that I know Steve, Matt, and I, when we talk in private, we look back and we're like, oh my God, like to be able to make this whiskey with this level of complexity, that's not an old whiskey by the, whatever the stupid normal standard is of like, hey, 10 years old is old whiskey. Cause whatever the hell that's supposed to mean. But it's this mindset that, maturity and complexity shouldn't be linked to age. The reality, I'm 37 years old, I'm wildly immature. That's the reality of it. Like age and maturity aren't in any real
23
capacity.
And I'm mature beyond my
Jesus, man, your late teen years must have been brutal.
I think it's interesting to see here in the chat, a lot of people talking about the smoke that they picked up or didn't pick up in the American Westland sample. And I think that underscores a really interesting point here is that we all have different palates, and that's just the reality of it. And we all pick up different things. We all appreciate different things. I can tell you, I see all the raw data from 1,600 plus samples or tastings done here. And each and every one of these whiskeys, while I think they've scored quite well as a group, and I'm really proud of that. Certainly proud of where we stand as an American single malt and as Westland amongst that group. But every single one of these got zeros, they got fives, and
wow.
it's all over the board. And I think that's really important to acknowledge. I've done a lot of these live, where we'll have 20, 30 people in a room at one time, and people talk when they're tasting these, and when you tell them what they are, they're surprised. And you'll have one person sitting next to another person and just completely disagreeing on all four of them. So and I think that's what's really interesting about, we talked a little bit about it last night. What's interesting about single malt is that it hits your palate in a different way, and everybody's palate is so distinct that you're going to get different reactions to different whiskeys. You're seeing it here in the chat. We talked a lot about that, even internally, and we drink whiskey every day for a living, and the three of us that are on the screen here, we're arguing over each other whether we should even tell people that our flagship has peat in it, or if that's a peated whiskey and what constitutes a peated whiskey. Chris came out of the gate saying, wow, that's peated. People are going to really notice that. And I came out of the gate saying, yeah, I guess I can taste it on the finish, but it's barely there. And you're seeing the same thing in the chat here, which I think is really interesting.
And I think it's interesting too. Like some people, they talk about like, oh, this Scottish producer is completely unpeated. Then you find out, oh, actually, no, they peat to like 6 ppm because it gives it some, like they peat, but just a tiny bit because it's very constructive to the profile they're trying to hit. And like, people view peat as black or white, right? Like it's peated and I hate it, or it's unpeated and I love it. And like, there's a grayness, there's a sliding scale that not everything peated is Lefroy, right? That's just gonna fucking rip your head off and stuff.
Yeah.
But
that's the exact intention of the peat used in our flagship blend, by our master blender, is to put that in there, in particular for palate effects.
Sure.
Peat and the combination of that and the kind of spiciness that it offers at low levels. Peat is a phenolic compound. A phenolic compound is a large group of compounds that fall into that category, not just peat, but also spices. So at a really low threshold, for most people, they can pick that up as spice and kind of background notes. And again, like you see it in the chat, there's some people who are picking up the peat. Some people who are like, oh, it's just like a shade of it there. But ultimately, it does something that is larger in service of the rest of the whiskey rather than just being peat. It's one of the most amazing things about peat. And actually, the same thing, too, with the sherry casks. Is there's sherry casks in this blend as well. We had the same debate as Steve said about, like, is this a sherry casked whiskey? But the result, we put the sherry cask in there for palate texture, which is a thing that's not commonly talked about. You see tasting notes and you read notes of chocolate and pastry and fruits, and all that stuff is true. But one of the big things that's really important is palate texture, the way it feels on your palate. And sherry casks do a really interesting job of rounding things on the palate. So we actually use the small proportion of sherry casks in the blend to do that on the palate. So it's kind of funny that it's got sherry and peat, these traditional things, but it's for like structural, like mechanical reasons in terms of the tasting profile on your palate and on the finish, which most people wouldn't know otherwise.
I dig that description for mechanical reasons. We had
John, can you throw back up the overall results? Because I think it kind of brings up a really fascinating point here. And granted, I know there
Chris just wants to see us in the lead again.
Yeah, I love that. 3 point. That's the first time I've seen a 3.42, but certainly my GPA wasn't even remotely close. So I'll tell you, one of the things that I love in looking at this is that it proves the point fundamentally that we were trying to make in Judgment, which is if you didn't know what you were tasting, if you were truly in a blind setting, and this is as good as it gets, right? Aside from the fact that you knew that it was single malt, this was as blind as it could be. It forced you to really think about, well, what do I like, not what am I marketed to?
Yeah.
I think if we had told you upfront what these countries were, and Steve and I have talked about this a lot, and it'd be really hard to go back and do it now because people have known this to a certain degree. And the Reddit effect will be is that like all of a sudden this will become some sort of like weird viral thing, which I love. There's this cool thought to it that is, if we had told you that one was the US, that we had told you that one was India, one was Australia, and one was Scotland going into it, Scotland would have crushed. Scotland, you would have like gone out of your way to like identify that, and then it probably would have been India, and then it would have been like the US and Australia. But if you think about it through the context of what do I like, which is what frankly a tasting should be, what do I like, you realize that there are these profile notes that we're able to achieve in these whiskeys are all bringing something really interesting and something really exciting to the palate. And that was the point of Judgment of Westland. Again, and I said it yesterday, Judgment of Paris wasn't about, is America better than France at making Cabernet and Chardonnay? That wasn't in any capacity what the goal of that was. The goal was to prove, can this new world place make something that's significant and stands beside some of these most famous regions as a producer of something really special. And I think the reality is you look at those numbers are all so incredibly close in the scheme of things that more often than not, I think we can fundamentally say that the quality of single malt whiskey that's being produced today, frankly, around the world is just insanely high. And yeah, there'll be regional variances and there'll be styles that you like or styles that you don't like, just depending on what you have. And obviously we're seeing a little bit of that in the chat. Some people like peat, some people don't. Yeah. If you don't like a chocolate note, yeah, Westland's probably going to be something that hits you a little funny. Or if you want a little bit of that peatiness, certainly the Indian and certainly the US whiskey is something you probably kind of came to. But the reality is that there is truly a style of single malt whiskey out there for every consumer on the planet. There's no doubt in my mind that that's absolutely the case. And it's exciting to see that when we take out that preconceived notion, when we remove the packaging element, I mean, listen, guys like Steve are good at what they do because they know how to read that data and say, well, how do we market this? How do we create a packaging here that resonates or create a brand identity that resonates? And we're lucky at Westland that stuff's very organic and natural. And frankly, it's a culture that, hopefully in listening to Steve, Matt, and I talk a little bit, you realize that it's genuine, these things that we're passionate and frankly in love with what we do at Westland. But man, oh man, like you remove all of that stuff and you just taste whiskey and you go, there were 4 great whiskeys in that box yesterday. 5 if you're lucky, but technically you only had 4 whiskeys. One of them you just had 2 of.
Yeah, and I mean, and that points too. So like one of the things I promise people, like if you want a kit also, I send out emails every other day or every second day with tips on how I taste and, how you go about a blind and, trying not to, don't like get in your head, right? Like this isn't San Francisco. Like you don't need to sit down and write down 100 notes, but like my biggest thing for people is to just sit down, drink it and think about first what you do like and what you don't like, and then start to kind of piece, why don't I like this? Is there a smoke character I don't like? Or I love this because it reminds me of apple pie and things that I really enjoy. And as you start to group, what either makes it stand out to you or kind of shy away, then you can start to drill in, kind of in a natural cadence, right? If you sit down and you're just like, I need to take 50 notes and assign a score, and like they all like there needs to be a loser and a winner, and I need to cover all parts of the scale. Like, you kind of miss the whole nuance of like, let's just sit down and drink some whiskey. And at the end, like, whether you know it or not, there's always going to be that one where you just keep going back to more than the rest. And like by the end of the night, which that is because it's empty and there's a little bit left to the others. And, you kind of just get this natural feel of like, all right, no matter what it is, like this was my favorite. I love it. Now let's see where it came from, which I think is kind of cool.
I'm interested to hear of those that got the 5 samples. Did you even notice that 2 of them were the same?
Yeah.
This is your time to weigh in the chat. 5
This
sample
is your
gang.
time to be honest and vulnerable.
Yeah, 5 sample gang. Did you know that you had a double in there? That is a good question, Steve.
You've been gloating for like 72 hours, so like you got to give us something back, guys. But
That's right.
I mean, I got a lot of emails that were like 5 samples ? And I was like, hold on, like, come on, be cool.
There was a guy earlier in the chat that definitely like called himself out and was like 0 sample gang. I was like, oh man, that hurts.
Which
like, I
we
love
appreciate.
I will tell you, if you're the 0 sample gang guy and you are on here, put a note in the chat. You're getting a better gift bag, to be clear, because frankly, I genuinely feel bad that like some people didn't get to. But again, to Jay's point yesterday, like we pretty dramatically underestimated the interest in this, which, that is, boy, if there's ever a way to describe Westland, it's the over and underestimating of various aspects of our business all in the same time.
Yeah, I mean, there was no way to put it other than the demand to take place was crushing. I expected like, we'll get a large crowd of very interested people. And, and I looked through how many people responded, and, I hope that 500 people were interested. 500 people were interested in the first 5 minutes. And I was like, oh shoot, like, the numbers, they're not going to add up. Like this is crazy, but
I know, Jay, when you and I were back and forth emailing about this a little bit, and we were like, oh, what's the right number and how many do? The first email I had to send was to my team who built those sample boxes and kind of got everything organized. And I was like, okay, how many kits could we make? And they're like, I think we could make like a certain X, Y, or Z. And then you and I kind of went back and finessed the numbers. I'm like, okay, well, how do we make this work? And then I remember I went to them when you said, oh, here's the number of people that like we could have potentially done. And I mean, it would have taken us weeks to put together that level of kits. Yeah. I mean, Steve and I were literally like, we don't have enough materials to even come close to that.
We need more whiskey. Yeah.
We need more whiskey.
But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. What just speaks to like, this is a fun experience. Like people, like going to a blind, like people think when you go to a tasting, like you have to be all pretentious and you have to know everything about everything. But like, this is in your home. Like you can drink the whiskey, you can fill out the sheet. Like this is all anonymized. Like we're not going to call you and be like, hey, 0 for 4 gang,
speak
like
for yourself.
like,
I might call that guy up. And
you can call me. I put it out there. I got none of the countries right, but like, this is the fun. Like it takes all of the edge and the concern, and like people get really self-conscious about tasting whiskey, and then they lose the whole point, which is just have fun and drink whiskey. So like, what better place than to drink whiskey at your home and then yab about it on YouTube? Like, it's a great setup. I think it's fun.
It's really interesting because you guys, Jay, we'll keep picking on you. You got all 4 wrong, but you actually knew the 4 countries that you were picking from to begin with. And that's been kind of the challenge for us, is that we really wanted to have the website, the judgmentofwestland.com, so that people that did have this experience over the last 2 months could keep going back and checking to see where the scores kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit. But there was no way to do that, to make the countries public and to ensure that anybody doing a tasting went in completely blind.
Yeah.
You went in blind because you didn't know what the whiskeys were, but you knew the countries at least. Certainly at the beginning of the project here, we were doing it with people that didn't even know the countries. So we were getting people saying Japan, we were getting people saying Scotland, we were getting people saying Taiwan, we were getting people saying every country that makes single malt was being guessed. And that was when it was really, really fun. And you saw their hopes and dreams just get crushed when they were wrong. Like, what do you mean I'm wrong? I was so sure of it.
This isn't Kurosawa. What?
Yeah. Listen, unfortunately, we ran out of 1984 single cast Kurosawa pretty early in the Judgment of Westland, so we had to rotate to something else. But yeah, it's I'm seeing in the chat a ton of people trying to kind of get us to tell what they are. I mean, I think we can give like a vague level of detail. We want to be sensitive to not screwing that up. But I think for the Scottish one, I think it's easy for us to say, listen, it was a Speyside single malt. If you'd not tasted that, it was probably pretty easy to pick out. With India and Australia, it gets a lot harder because there's a limited amount. But again, and I'll leave this as vague as possible. They are whiskeys that you can buy at any very good single malt whiskey store in America. I can guarantee you that, to the point where the single malt Scotch whiskey is a top 5 selling single malt from Speyside. Like, it's a big boy. It is a very big boy. And frankly, that was the one where I remember when Dave Broom and Sam came back with the list, and I was like, there's no way those guys are going to be cool with being in here, because they have nothing to gain from this, to be totally transparent. The reality is unless they blow all of us away, if they blow Australia and India and Australia away, it's like, well, yeah, no shit. Of course you should do that by the common expectation. But man, oh man, if you look at the numbers again, it's much closer. I mean, the fact that the U.S. is, winning and the overall, that's awesome. But again, it's not even so much about winning. It's about showing that we are capable in this country. Take not even just Westland, take Westland out of it, just ourselves, but this country is capable of making incredible single malt whiskey. The level of passion that exists in distilleries across this country, the people that Matt, Steve, and myself meet when we're at trade shows and festivals, the people that are behind the booth that are just dying to go out and get a beer after the end of a whiskey festival, like, these people really care. And frankly, I would consider the 3 of us as a part of that. It's really exciting to see what's going on in single malt. I mean, Steve said it yesterday, and I don't know if people recognize how major a point this is, but there are more distilleries in America making single malt than there are in Scotland. Like, take that and really think about what the scale of that is. I mean, 200 distilleries in this country making a single malt whiskey. Now, yeah, I mean, granted, there's a handful of us that are exclusively making single malt, and certainly Westland is really proud of the fact that we are a single malt distillery. But man, oh man, like 200 distilleries in this country making single malt whiskey, the potential for great creative things, for things that resonate with a culture or an agriculture or show a typicity of geography, that is a real thing that's going on in the single malt whiskey industry.
And I think that's crazy too, because it just was like the growth of single malt is crazy. Like I was on an interview with the groups over at Starward, I believe, over in Australia, and I was just amazed, like, the whole industry is rising very quickly, and it was easy for me to call out, okay, what are the 4 biggest single malt categories I see growing? It's obviously Australia. India is just exploding in the spirits category. And I think China is going to be there in a couple of years. They're a little bit behind just because they don't have the distilleries pumping out product in the same way the other countries. But I do want to pivot real quick. I have a question for my co-host, John. So John and I talk, we quite often disagree about whiskey almost all the time.
We're
But
good at it.
of the two of us, I drink a gargantuan amount of single malt. John is definitely like our American whiskey correspondent. And I'm curious, like, what did you think? Were you surprised? Like, did all these taste kind of the same? Were you surprised by the diversity? Like, what were your thoughts as kind of our, like, I told John, like, hey, you're about to drink a bunch of single malt. I like kicked him out of the nest. Like, here's a bunch, like, drink it, go. Like,
Have fun,
did you have
idiot.
any, yeah, like, did you have any interesting insight from that?
I thought it was pretty cool. I expected it to be something where there would be 1 or 2 things in there that I would immediately say, you know what, this one I could just push out. It sucks. I'm not going to drink it. And that wasn't the case for any of them. So, like, as a predominantly bourbon or American whiskey drinker, it was something where it was definitely going to be outside of my comfort zone. But it wound up being kind of eye-opening that as I dissected them, I went through, did my tasting, nosed through everything, tasted all through them, took a few basic notes, let it sit, came back 15 minutes later, and did it all again. And I was really just kind of impressed with the fact that I didn't know what countries I was supposed to be or what we were tasting anyway. And like, I didn't want to. I mean, I could have looked at the emails back and forth, right, and picked out what's going on. But I wanted it to just be totally blind. And I thought that it was a really cool, unique thing to do that, I mean, bourbon guy is not going to get into these that often. So it was pretty fun overall.
Okay, cool. I mean, I like it, I just love seeing different people's perspectives. And I also kind of, when we were talking about this, I was like, all right, I'm about to take this humongous population of primarily bourbon and rye drinkers and be like,
Right.
not 1, but 4 single malts. Like, here's your throat, like, ram it down. Let's see what you think. And, honestly, we're seeing a lot of people surprised, like, holy shit, like, this was really interesting. It was really diverse. Like, I love it. And
Yeah.
hopefully you guys are seeing the same from the rest of your audiences. But, I like seeing, people are like, oh, American single malt's interesting. Like, let's give it a go now.
I'm going to make
was
the
a lot more to it than I would have guessed.
shameful brand guy plea, which is, listen, if you're a bourbon drinker, you're a rye drinker in this country, which is a very reasonable thing to be, given the illustrious history we have of those 2 types of spirits. Having a bottle of single malt in the house isn't sacrilege, to be clear. Like, and if it's going to be a bottle of whiskey and you love American whiskey, then why the hell wouldn't it be a bottle of American single malt? I mean, it's a genuine question. Like, listen, if you're emphatically proud of the idea of good whiskeys being made in this country, the reality is you don't need to buy an export to get a good bottle of single malt. You've proven that through your reviews this evening and from last night. I mean, there's a ton of awesome whiskey being made in this country.
Definitely.
Yeah, I was actually looking at the data today, trying to see if you look at the global averages and then the our bourbon averages only, and recognize what John's saying, which is, most of the audience here is more familiar, at least, with bourbon and rye. Do those results bear that out in any way? I'm looking at the US one, and within our bourbon tasting, we scored slightly lower than we do on a global stage, right? Is that because of some of that hint of peat that's in that whiskey? And did that impact the data in some way with a group that's largely unfamiliar with peat, or has chosen not to like peat, or choose peat? So all these kind of questions go in my head, which again just makes this whole thing a lot more interesting. But I mean, honestly, we've got John here. We've at least converted 1 person, right? So that to single malt.
Yeah.
So I'm happy there.
This was a cool premise. Like Jay said, he pitched it to me. He's like, hey, you want to drink a bunch of single malts? And I was like, oh, what? Do I want to what?
And I was like, here's your tracking number. They're already
Yeah.
on the way.
He's like, just try this. You'll like it. And we selected some casks with Chris last year. We had a great time with those, and I really enjoyed that. I was pretty shocked to find some stuff that I didn't expect to like as many things out of the kit as I did, which I thought was cool perspective. And actually, my scores line up really closely with the Reddit ones. I don't remember exactly what the full order was, but I did have that Australian at the top of my list just because I think coming from that bourbon side, the influence it was in that was just, it leaned my way, and I thought it was cool. I didn't know what the hell it was, but I liked it, so I thought that was cool. And I got a good pile of notes out of all of these, and flip-flopped a little bit back and forth on mine. I won't tell you guys where you rated. Yeah, it was third. But it was because I was back and forth, though, and I couldn't nail down what it was between that one and the other. It was that one and the Scott that I couldn't really decide which was for me. But overall, I thought it was really cool, man. It was fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Good.
I'm seeing in the chat here a couple questions about, what's the best way to find American single malts? And there was a question earlier about whether Westland is in favor of defining single malt in this country. I can say adamantly that yes, we are in favor of that. In fact, we have been leading the charge since 2016 to make that happen.
Cool.
And we've done that by starting the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, which is a good place to start if you're just looking to see who's making single malt in America. Go to americansinglemaltwhiskey.org. That is the commission's website that we manage, and you'll see all of our members listed there and links to their website. So that's a good place to start. Are we in favor of definition? Yes, that's the whole point, or at least the main point. And we have been petitioning the federal government for going on 6 years now, and we're close, actually. I've never been more optimistic that it's going to happen soon. I actually had some correspondence with them this morning, the TTB, who manages this process for the Treasury Department, and I am pretty optimistic that it's going to happen within the next few weeks. So keep an eye out.
Wow.
It'll be big news. It'll be big news.
You will hear the collective scream coming from Westland when it goes through an incitement. It'll be loud.
I mean, not to put too fine a point on it here, but like this will be a big deal. I mean, it's not, how often does a category get born before your eyes as a whiskey enthusiast? I mean, forget American whiskeys for a second, because you look back and it's bourbon and rye, and okay, there's 2 whiskeys over the past 300 years.
Right.
But even anything else around the world, to be able to kind of, as a whiskey enthusiast, to be kind of living through this moment where like this new category is being born, both first of all from the 200 plus distilleries that are making single malt, but also formal category definition, is just a very cool thing to be alive for, in my opinion. Like when you look at the grand scheme of things. But when that happens, I mean, so what we're talking about here, to be clear to everybody, maybe you guys covered this last night, but is for American single malt to be protected in the same way that bourbon is protected, right?
Sure.
For those definitions happening. So, and if you're curious, you can go to americansinglemaltwhiskey.org, like Steve said, to see the proposed definition that we submitted to the TTB, and we're very hopeful that TTB picks that proposed definition. We did it with huge industry support. All the American single malt distillers banded together to do this. So it's a really, really exciting thing. And I will say, actually, what we were trying to do with this was to make sure that we kept the innovation within our category. We believe very strongly that this is the strength of American single malt, is that we are pushing the boundaries on things. I mean, it's still single malt, malted barley, yeast, water, casks, made at one distillery. But what you see across American single malt consistently is people departing from Scottish norms, typically in one direction or another. And we wanted that to remain. So the definition that we created was this kind of nice sweet spot between the overly rigid characteristics of the Scotch Whisky Association and the way that they protect Scottish single malt, and then like how loose Japanese whiskey is. If anybody follows Japanese whiskey, it's like anything goes. You send whiskey to Japan, bottle it there. You send bourbon to Japan, you bottle it there. You call that Japanese whiskey, no joke. So we wanted something right in between it. We think we've done that. So it's pretty exciting to be able to have that. And gosh, if it does happen, Chris is kind of not joking about you'll hear the scream from the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah,
If that
I mean,
happens, we'll be pretty pumped.
I'm not gonna lie, Matt, and like, don't take this one. I'm picturing Matt like on the roof of Westland, like shirt was with like a t-shirt cannon, and just like t-shirts going all over the Puget when like this
It's
rolls.
not,
I mean,
that's not
Everybody
nearly
like-
graphic enough.
oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
That the description
I
didn't
approve.
start with shirtless and dancing, so you've missed something.
okay. I mean, I will take it. I mean, so we are coming up on the top of the hour here. Guys, if you just joined recently, I will send an email tomorrow. I'll kind of sum these rankings. You know, it's been really great to have all of you, as well as you, Steve, Chris, and Matt. And I just want to remind folks, if you join anytime between the first 5 minutes and now, if you want some free Westland slag that is not of the booze variety, drop a comment on this video after the stream ends with your Instagram handle. We'll reach out to a couple people. We got some swag bags. I'm told Chris is going to bless them with a little extra love if you were part of the 0 for 4 gang, or the, you know, you didn't get a sample packing. But, you know, you guys, if people are interested, if they want to check out more about Westland, I'm told you might have some, you know, you might have brewed up a code in the back room for them. Like, where can they find more about what you guys have? And, you know, we'll kind of keep them up to date, but tell the people what you got.
Yeah. So first and foremost, obviously, we are of that size where going into retail stores asking for our whiskey makes a huge difference for us. So, you know, if you've got a local whiskey store that is carrying Westland, please support them. If you don't and you want them to, please encourage them to do so. But for those of you that are in a spot where maybe it's a little harder to find a really good whiskey selection, you could actually go onto our website, westlanddistillery.com, click on the shop part of the page, and it'll ask you where you live. And if you don't live in Washington State, click on the sort of everywhere else component. You can buy anything from now and through the 31st of January. And if you use the code official judge, we'll pay for your shipping. So it'll be completely free shipping and handling. I think it's like a $15 savings overall. I think, listen, all of us in the digital age recognize shipping for booze has gotten expensive, but we appreciate the support. We're really glad to have people excited about what we're doing. And if that means that we need to pay a little bit to get a bottle of our whiskey into your home, like, we're down to do it. We are a send it culture. I feel like I want to put that on our business cards, Matt.
Send it. Culture.
We are going to send that whiskey and we are going to send it free.
Man, that is great. So yeah, so once again, guys, rock on with that. Once again, too, you know, if you want some free swag, drop a comment on the video. Guys, Matt, Chris, Steve, it has been great to have you. Before we send off, I want to give you guys a reveal one more time. If you joined, if you tasted, if you have any hope of going 4 for 4, I've heard 0 people claim that title, by the way. So if you got 4 for 4, don't email me, tag me on social or something. My email is busy enough. But John, let's roll those reveals one more time. I think was there 4 or 5 different tasting?
Yeah,
4,
we've
right?
got 4 different tasting cards here. So as you sip through, do I have mine here, Haley? I mean, if you haven't done it by now, you already kind of fucked it up. But you got a tasting card
Get
here,
it done.
on
Get
the
it
bottom
done.
of it is the title. So this one is there's a measure of malt. There's Taste Has No Borders. There's Whiskey Reckoning. I don't actually have the exact names either, so I think I
You got them
Yeah,
right so far.
truncated them a little bit, but that's what we got there for the reveal. If you guys want to go through those, just so you know your exact order of things, if you chose to write them down and rank them.
And if you missed this, or you're too lazy to go back onto YouTube and watch this again to catch these, email us, info@westlanddistillery.com, or Steve, Matt, and Chris at westlanddistillery.com. Not Steve, Matt, and Chris at Westland. That won't go anywhere.
No, definitely send it there.
Yeah, Chris is
That's just
emailing
a trash
IT right
folder.
now. We need a quick email alias.
Right
created.
the spam. Straight to jail.
But if you've got this sitting, in your office somewhere at home, and you get to it in a couple of days, and you want to know what the regions are, just send us a note and we'll let you know.
Rock on. Well, thank you guys. It has been awesome to have you. It is awesome to wrap up. Finally, I can put away my home shipping department. We can all kick back. This is fun. No one has ever put together something like this. So I appreciate you guys not only putting time, effort, and resources behind it, but also thought, right? Like, everyone would have been like, here's a Google form, just like punch your shit in, and like we'll make the intern out back, like compile it. Like, so much thought went into this, and like I like it. You put yourselves out there. You guys did well globally. Australia, for some reason, is a big fan of our Bourbonites. We'll crush that demon at some other point. But, anyone else, if you are interested, we picked 3 single casks from Westland. 2 of them sold out almost instantly. We have a little bit of our third left, which was matured in an Oloroso sherry barrel. It's awesome. Folks from last night can tell you the same. And I not to take away from the Westland appeal, but we do have some more American single malt coming. It's not from Westland. We'll do more with Westland. I'm told they're saving the Golden Goose the best. They buried it. We'll get to that shortly. But if you are interested in American single malt, you can always find more from us here at Weekly Whiskey, and we've got some more casts on the way. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign on off. If you were looking for more from John, you can find him at the Bourbon Finder. And as always, I'm over at whiskeyraiders.com. And it's been great to have you all, whether you're virtual, whether you're hanging here with us tonight. And Matt, thanks for coming out. It was great to have you. Well,
my pleasure.
Chris
Thanks,
Steve,
you guys.
You're cool too. So thanks.
The peons. No,
Cool
thanks,
guy.
guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
That was blessed. Thanks, everyone.